very good morning. My name is Professor Shahab Enam Khan. I teach international relations. I'd like to welcome all of you to this session on South Asia, a case of typical borders and boundaries. This is the session B, and we expect to discuss the South Asian issues related to borders and boundaries, whether through the landscape of political geography or human geography, or perhaps the making and unmaking of the very concept of security through the ideas of borders and the boundaries that we perceive through our states, the cooperations and the conflicts dynamics that we have been witnessing throughout the history of the very genesis of South Asia. With that remark, I'd like to present the presenters. We have a remarkable, brilliant minds from the South Asia as a whole. With that, Dr. Dhananjay Tripathi from South Asian University. He's a senior assistant professor who will be speaking on the theme South Asian borders, a complicated story, and that will be focusing on the border studies perhaps. Then we will be inviting Dr. Vaishali Raghuvanshi from Banaras Hindu University. She's an assistant professor, will be speaking on borders and bilateralism in the region. And then subsequently, Dr. Monica Verma. I hope she's here. She is also from the South Asian University, will be speaking on the very construct of South Asia from the Indo-Pacific perspective. Then we have Uddipta Ranjan Bourah. She's a research scholar at the South Asian University, and I was quite particularly intrigued by the title of her speak, which is Inheritance of an Unsettled Border. So, which is quite fascinating by the way she constructed her idea of the history of imperial miscommunication, which has perhaps defined the Sino-Indian border. We have Ankur Sharma, who's again a research scholar at the South Asian University, who will be speaking on the fencing and open border by analyzing the Indo-Nepalese antagonistic actions over Kalapani border dispute. Then we have the administrative commandant of the Indian Army, Colonel Dr. Bhaskar Gupta, to come and speak about the disaster management, which is one of the key components in the South Asian cooperative discourse. And perhaps Commandant will also be looking into the cross-border challenges from the Indian perspective. We have Nancy Puri, research scholar at the Amity University. And Puri will be looking into the transboundary water conflict once again, the very humanitarian dimension which links day-to-day life, the political construction, and of course the economic construction of water, and we'll be focusing on India and Bangladesh through analytical perspective. With that, the composition of our session, which is quite diverse and touches upon the multi-dimension of what we understand in terms of geography, boundary, and the political understanding of a border and boundaries. May I now request Dr. Tripathi to speak and present his thoughts and paper to the esteemed audience and the speakers. Dr. Tripathi, up to you.
Thank you, Professor. I hope you'll be doing fine. Thank you, Knight, for giving me this opportunity to speak in this very prominent conference that has been organized. Today, I will be speaking on South Asian borders, basically a complicated story. This is how I titled my paper. Professor Khan, how much time I have?
You have exactly 9 minutes.
9 minutes. Thank you. So it's very difficult to summarize this story of South Asian borders, Professor Khan, in 9 minutes, but I will try my best. And I hope the other panelists will take the debate from me and try to bring other aspects of South Asian borders. That is how the panel is arranged. So the borders is a very complicated story, not only for South Asia, for the whole of the world. Borders means the term itself, even if I look at a very simple English meaning of border, term border, it means some kind of restriction, some kind of imposition. Means so it's not a simple term, but what make it different in different parts of the world is how you deal with a border. So like the American and Canadian border, it's a story, it's a successful story in terms of border trade that links America and Canada very much together. If you look at the story of borders and nation states from where it started, and that is Europe. After the World War II, they decided to deal with it in a very different manner. They thought that let's borders start connecting all of us, and they developed border regions. And by border regions, what they have done, they brought the border communities to be a partner, in a way, to be a partner in development projects, to be partners in the border region. And today we see that Europe, if you look at European Union and Europe at large, then you'll find that most of the countries are integrated in such a way that it's very difficult for you to realize that you are traveling from one country to another country because the Schengen visa, it's the same currency, etc. So they have brought down not only the physical borders, but also the mental borders in whole of Europe. And that is why no wonder we take it as a best example of regional integration in the world. Now, if you look at all these stories, as I said, that it's a complicated term, border itself, but the way you deal with it really matters. And the Americans, Canadians, and also it's not like America dealt with all its border in a very simple manner because there is a US-Mexico border as well. But look at Europeans, they have dealt it so well. They managed it so well. Now, coming to our own region, that is South Asia, and why I say that this is a very complicated story. Because one thing that as a student of South Asian integration, what intrigued me is the fact that we are the fastest growing region of the world. Our GDP, the growth rate, if you look at all of the South, it's not only India, all of the South Asian countries, it's more than 5 to 6%. The region is growing by 5 to 6%. Now, such a region, which is a impressive growth rate, which is globalizing at a very fast rate. Here, if you look at intra-regional trade, means that is abysmally low. It's less than 5%. And then it really draw our attention. And what is wrong with this region? Because look at all of us, all the South Asians. If I go and settle down in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, it's very difficult for anybody to recognize if I know the language and food habit, if I develop that food habit. It's very difficult for anyone to really understand, like, who am I? What is my country of origin, or what is my place of origin? So we are almost like a same kind of people. We have a similar cultural connections, etc. But despite this, we are not integrated, and forget about integration, we are regarded as one of the least integrated regions of the world. So there are different perspectives on this integration part of South Asia, purely from IR domain. Our IR realist friends like to call it as an Indo-Pak rivalry. That is one of the prime issues behind this integration story of South Asia. Some of them like to call it as a India as a hegemon, not allowing the small states to be a part of it, part of the entire region, and try to dominate the region. And small states have their anxieties, and that is why this is not integrated. So for me, yeah, of course, I'm not denying this, like we can debate it at some particular point of time. But there are other stories as well. And I would like to see this border South Asian integration from the lens of border studies. When I say border studies, it's an emerging discipline, although very much dominated by the Western scholarship. But nowadays, even in South Asia and in Asia, in Japan, we have a center. Now we are also trying to understand our borders, and the story of borders are not simple, because borders are just not the lines. If you have to understand borders, you have to look at the historical part of the borders, like how borders got created. And here, the complex story of South Asian borders begins. If you look at the South Asian borders, whether it's the India-Nepal border, it came into being, formally came into being in 1816 by Treaty of Sagoli after this Anglo-Nepalese War, whether it's a Durand Line which came into existence in 1893, and again after a conflict and a negotiation, whether it's a story of India-Pakistan border, 1947. I know all of you know, I have very less time, so I will not get into the details. Whether it's a story of East and West Pakistan, and that is the liberation of Bangladesh, 1971. If you look at how all of these borders got created, it's created with a war, with a negotiation, and some of these borders are like involved a lot of refugee movement, migration, killing, violence. Whereas I sometimes feel like the Europeans are so concerned about the genocide, about the Nazis past, but the kind of a violence that took place in this subcontinent during the India-Pakistan border is not being seen anywhere in the world, basically, in the modern times. And the kind of a displacement that we have witnessed is a trauma, and that trauma is still there. So that all these borders in South Asia that are created over the period of time are created by the colonial masters, colonial rulers, with a specific agenda. But even in the post-colonial period, the borders that we have created, or the way we have dealt with the borders, is not a very simple or a happy, pleasant story. There are a lot of trauma attached to it. So what we like to call it, as one of the very prominent border studies scholar of this region, Professor Sanjay Chaturvedi, like to call this region as not only the post-colonial, but a post-partition region. And he says that you cannot understand this region if you just concentrate on this concept post-colonial, because we are not a post-colonial, we are a post-partition region. And then the story is very much clear if you start looking at it from that perspective. So when you got partition, when you became a new state like Pakistan, India, the primary goal, and even when Bangladesh was in 1971, the primary goal was to nationalize citizens. And when I say nationalize citizens, not like economic way, but it's like mentally you prepare them that you are a citizen of this country, and you are there are unique characters of this country. We don't share anything with other countries. You know, it's so artificial when you say that Indians and Pakistanis don't share anything among themselves. It's so artificial when you say that Bangladesh and India don't share anything among themselves. We have unique identities, very, very different cultures. It's absolute lie that we kept telling to our people for such a long period of time. We shared so much among ourselves.
Dr. Tripathi, you have only 2 minutes. I'm not
2 minutes. Right.
I'm crossing the boundary of time.
Right. Thank you. So I'll try to summarize it. So that means it's a very complicated story, the way a nation state is being established here. And we are taught what we are not, basically. And the physical borders that was created by all these partition things, we also created a mental border in our citizens. So what happened? The state started making sure of this thing, that let's not allow the citizens to cross this border. So if you don't allow the citizens to cross this border, then what you are essentially saying that don't have an intra-regional trade, because if you have trade, that means mobility. So it is not that all of the borders are like this, like India-Bhutan, India-Nepal borders are a different stories, but look at India-Nepal relation, the way it is developing over the period of time. Again, the borders is becoming a central piece of argument between these two countries, whether it's a blockade or Ankur has a presentation, so I will not speak on that, but it is becoming a central issue between these two countries. Now, India-Bangladesh border, so much of complication despite improving political ties. So the idea of states here is not to allow the people to cross the border by any means. So it's very easy. You can go to US, you can go to Europe, but you cannot go to a neighboring country. I cannot go to Pakistan, by just getting a visa, even if I'm a peace activist. That's really explained what is so complicated about the South Asian borders. How this is to be done. The last point, political willingness. The idea that we have to develop. Look at our challenges, almost similar challenges. Look at our people, almost similar kind of people, similar kind of aspiration, similar kind of challenges, and similar kind of solution. So why that kind of border? Why we are maintaining such rigid borders? Can we allow ourselves to cross these borders? And I think the state has to decide. And look at the world. It is becoming more and more regional. It is no longer a globalized world. The post-pandemic world is more regional. So I think South Asians have to understand to deal with this complicated story of their borders, or else the problem that are there and the problem that may come will be very difficult for us to handle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tripathi. I think you have highlighted very important points, starting from the cultural origin and how the trade can essentially allow mobility, and how the artificial ideas of border essentially creates the obstacle in regional cooperation, let alone integration. And this is very important to understand how border has accentuated the very genesis of hegemonic discourses, or perhaps the small state syndromes or anxiety, as you have aptly stated in your discussion. And the very important academic discourse that you have brought in, the border study, which is of course emerging as a new discipline, still very much constructed within the Western framework. I'm quite sure the South Asian University will be looking into that and construct a very Eastern and the very much South Asian discourse. And this is the very purpose of the South Asian University. And I'm quite sure we'll be looking forward to a greater discourse coming from the South Asian University. And I'm quite fascinated to see the pool of researcher today in this particular session. And you have very much highlighted the issues of Dura-Line, Anglo-Nepalese War, and obviously 1971, Great Liberation War of Bangladesh, and the issues that we really need to study over the years to come, the negotiations, how the negotiations actually shaped the borders, the wars and the conflicts, and the interest of the colonials. And one of the important points that I would certainly take as a note is the transition from the colonial, post-colonial to post-partition discourse, which is very important, where the trauma and the post-trauma and the second, third, fourth generations looking into trauma and the concept of the border is significantly different. So this is, I think, a great takeaway from your presentation, which also links with the mental border and obviously the political realism and idealism and romanticism. Thank you very much, Dr. Tripathi, for your valuable remarks. May I now move into the ideas that Dr. Vaishali Raghuvanshi will be presenting to the esteemed audience and the experts gathered today. Dr. Raghuvanshi?
Thank you.
Assistant Professor at Banaras Hindu University. Doctor, please.
Thank you so much, Professor Khan. a very warm welcome, and I must thank Dr. Dhananjay Tripathi, who has always been the torchbearer of these discussions whenever we had in our university, my university from where I did my studies, South Asian universities. And I'm so happy to see all my friends and all the people with whom we have shared the table somewhere or the other to discuss these things. And for that, I'm thanking also to Nice Nepal and I hope I'm audible. Yeah. So before I start the discussion, this talk is basically based on the attempt which I did, in terms of which most of the people who are students of border studies in South Asia have done at large, to understand what kind of what are the various tools which exist to understand the perception of border. And so this talk is going to be basically about how we can use cinema to understand the issues of borders in South Asia, and particularly while the bilateralism in South Asia, as I have mentioned it in my topic as well, that it is about South Asian bilateralism and the linkages of border with that. While bilateralism in South Asia pertains to all the countries in the region, this discussion is going to be limited to the India-Pakistan bilateral ties. As we can see that these are the most dominant players in the region, and even till the date, the idea behind the integration is always challenged by the border perception, by the idea of mental border in this part of the South Asian region, we can say. Now, borders have an impact on bilateralism, and when they are seen not just as mechanical cartographic lines, but from the point of view of mental borders. I'm extending the same discussion which Dr. Tripathi has started, and I'm taking it to the level of how we can use it from how we can analyze it from the perspective of the creative sources. Now, border studies scholars have given equal relevance to the mental borders, and this is in these recent times that we see that there is a lot of scholarship coming in to understand the mental borders. The mental boundaries stay with people. The boundary of human community inevitably exists within the consciousness of its members, and hence, to some extent, it is subject to mental processes and patterns. And these borders are not just hard territorial lines, rather, they are the institutions that results from the bordering policies. They are thus about people. And that is why it has been always pressurized, and it has been always extended through an argument by the people who have worked extensively. Like I would talk about the Newman, Professor Newman, who has spoken about it is about the bottom up, not about the top down. Now, when we look into South Asia, states have a preference for securitized border. And certainly there are various reasons for it. Like Sir said, we have a history of the partition, and we have our history is basically revolves around the identity politics, and it has a lot of bitter truths to accept, to be accepted. South Asian states consciously use methods to justify these securitized borders. And historically, there has been unquestioned support from the people to the state for such a security-centric approach. And it is in this way that the mental borders becomes the vantage point for bilateral relation between India and Pakistan. And there is no denying the fact that there are various forms of data that can be used to analyze this perception of mental border. But why I have initiated the talk with the cinema, and why I'm attempting and trying to study cinema and mental borders, because it is an attempt to situate the entire discussion into the aesthetic turn in IR. And cinema, as we know, is a mode of popular culture, which is an effective tool in order to understand the social phenomena, especially from the people's perspective. And the meaning of the process creation, which we observe in the cinematic construction, is largely embedded here in the linguistics and is derived from the people's experiences. The deconstruction of these data sources basically lead to the understanding of the process of the mental border construction and also deconstruction. While the data sources of cinema is huge, but I'm not going to get into that because of the paucity of time. We have just realized that we have got only 8 to 10 minutes, and though it has been mentioned, but still it is very difficult to talk about all the movies in this limited time and then deconstruct, do the dialogical deconstruction and then contextualization of all the movies. So I'll limit myself to one movie from each, one from Bollywood and one from Lollywood. So first movie which I will talk about from Bollywood, which is from the Indian perception, is LOC Kargil. And the second movie which I'll be taking is Ramchand Pakistani, which was released in the year 2008. Now, the movie LOC Kargil was made in 2003, and we all have been fan of that movie. We have seen it. And as the name itself suggests, needless to tell people here about how it is, this movie depicts the India-Pakistan border in Kashmir. The film centers around the valor of Indian armed forces and the strategic depth of the military operations. It is also filled with the references to India, Pakistan in general, and border between the two countries in particular. Now, these references in the movie have portrayed the India-Pakistan relation to be surrounded by the conflict and hostility even before the commencement of the war. No surprise here, the thematic development and the dialogues in the movie represents border not only as the highly securitized and non-porous, but also as a dividing line which needs to be protected from any kind of infiltration. In turn, it provides impetus to a mental image of the border that is rigid and hostile. And this depiction finds a manifestation in dialogues when in the beginning of the movie, an army commander orders to one of his lieutenant to conduct a recce for the lost patrol. And he states that the information is received, quote unquote, the information is received that certain rats have crossed the borders, crossed the LOC. Now, in response to this, the lieutenant says, we will trample those rats and push them to the other side of the LOC. Movie also represents the strategic planning of the Indian Army. During this sequence, an officer suggests, during one sequence, which if you will see the movie, you will understand it thoroughly. An officer suggests crossing the LOC and cutting the enemy supplies from behind. But the general replies that the orders are very clear. We'll be going by the book. At no point of time we'll cross the line of control. And these dialogues, which are made with regard to the physical borders, are also capable of constructing mental borders by the process of othering the neighboring country. And this othering has a very strong presence in the cinematic portrayal. These powerful dialogues, especially coupled by the fineness of the actors, are pertinent tools that draw up an imagery that hostility lies across the border. And this also creates an impression that people beyond the borders are significant others who are antagonistic to us. Such imagination of physical borders and military strategy have led to the development of mental border that is universalized and persists even during peace times. And there is no time, otherwise I would have brought certain tweets of that time and certain dialogues which were there out there in the TOI, Times of India and Indian Express, where people have gone to the extent and calling and creating their own dialogues while coming out of the movie theater. And even after certain times, people have created the dialogues, and it has been used in the general sense to specify the other. Now, the second movie is, I'll quickly go to the second movie, and that is Ramchand Pakistani. As I said, this is a movie by Lollywood, which is a Pakistani cinema. It was released in 2008. And this movie is set around India-Pakistan border at a time when the friction between these two countries was high due to the terrorist attack on the Indian parliament. And this movie has presented the story of a father, Shankar, and a son, Ramchand, who are Hindu Dalit, and they live in Pakistan. They have, without knowing, they have crossed the border inadvertently and are caught by the security forces on the Indian side. Now, even a kid is not spared by the security forces and arrested on the suspicion of him being a spy. Ramchand and Shankar they've been kept in jail in Bhuj without officially registering them as a prisoner. There's no official formality for that, as it is portrayed in the movie. In the end, as the Indo-Pak ties begin to improve, Ramchand and his father were released later and sent to Pakistan via Wagha border in Punjab. It's a beautiful tale, well directed movie. I recommend it to most of the people, but even here, if nobody has seen it, please go and watch it. The dialogues and the sequence in this movie shows the nature of India-Pakistan relation, which indicate the existence of mental borders. Now, how? As Ramchand is caught by the BSF, Border Security Forces, the suspicion and the mistrust of the BSF officer is evident when he finds a slingshot with the boy and says that he has brought a weapon with him to flee Kashmir. The general rigidity of the India-Pakistan border is understood when Ramchand's mother eagerly ran towards the border, but other villagers,
Dr.
yes,
Raghuvanshi, I understand this is a super fascinating discussion, but I'm sorry, you have only 2 minutes.
yeah, I'll just finish it off. I'll not go with other dialogues, but I'll just finish it. Thank you. It is just one more reference, and then I'll proceed with the conclusion, and then I'll finish it off. One of the dialogue which narrates the role of a border in giving identity to people when an inmate, while they are in the jail, he states that had there been no border, you wouldn't have been Bengali, he wouldn't have been Indian, and I wouldn't have been Pakistani. Such a border is more mental than physical. This is what has been my finding in the paper, which I have written, co-authored with Sir. And this is what I find as and when I see the movie time and again. And in the last, I would state that it is the creation of these mental borders that are at the base of the sustenance and the psychological sustenance and the maintenance of the psychological frictional bilateral ties between the two countries. And the future scope of this particular discussion is when we can look into the Web 2.2. Today, in the COVID times, when we were not watching movies and when there were limited release, we find the same kind of discussion happening through Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, all these sources. So that is the future scope, or that is the future plans which I have to deal with it to understand the mental borders. Thank you so much, Professor Khan. I think I just limited it to the 10 minutes.
This is brilliant, Dr. Raghuvanshi. I think one of the key highlight is the you have just gone beyond the mechanical cartographic lines. And I think this is very important. And the role of cinematic perspective is something we haven't really brought into the understanding of border. And I think this is very important. Hollywood did it. I mean, one of the cultural imperialism is done by Hollywood, and even the British movies, the French cultural aspect, Olios Fosse, or perhaps the British Council, or all these movies. I mean, this is how the cultural imperialism takes place. Even the conflict narratives are done through that. I mean, even if you look at the Iraq War, I mean, the role of international media was heavily contested. The very simple reason is how you projected the wars. And you have rightly mentioned the limits of the understanding, how the media, how the effects of the cinematography really creates the limited understanding about a fact and figure. And you have really brought into the construction, deconstruction, and the contextualization of certain phenomena through the media projection. You have really brought the issue of limits of securitization, which is probably a critical factor in the understanding of border and how this has impacted the Indo-Pakistan perception among the mass, whether it is in the other side of the border. Then the issue of the popular culture, people's perspective through the linguistics intervention, if I may use that term. The movies, unfortunately, we're not very familiar with these movies, but I'm quite sure these movies have had appeal on both the sides of the border. And you have rightly mentioned that it is not only the Bollywood or Lollywood. Perhaps now you are into YouTube, Netflix, and social media, and quite sure these are essentially changing the narratives, because you're now shifting from the big screen to small screen. And that will certainly change our perspective about the future of media to misinformation, disinformation, and everything. And that's how the whole world media politics will shape. Thank you very much, Dr. Raghuvanshi, and I congratulate you for this outstanding paper. May I now request Dr. Verma to present her paper, South Asia in Indo-Pacific, Case for Reconsidering Economic Borders.
Thank you so much, Chair Sir. So today I'm going to talk about South Asia in Indo-Pacific and the case for reconsidering economic borders. So basically what I'm going to talk about is that how, there are changes taking place in the Indo-Pacific region, and these changes are of a very political kind. And we can refer to these changes as geopolitical changes. And my paper talks about how these geopolitical changes are going to lead to further, geo-economic changes that will change the economic alignments in the Indo-Pacific region. And once that happens, South Asia's, role and South Asia's economic dynamics are also going to change. While I do that, I also want to talk about 4 major points through my paper. First major point that I'm going to make today is that there is emerging geopolitical convergence in Indo-Pacific. So when I say there is emerging geopolitical convergence in Indo-Pacific, what I want to say is that, the concept of free and open Indo-Pacific has been given by a certain group of countries. It was first given by Japan. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe from Japan in 2007, he visited India and he said that the Indian Ocean plus the Pacific Ocean, this entire region is linked in an arc. And the role that India and Japan are going to play is going to be phenomenal. So according to him, there needs to be, this entire region needs to be left free and open for trade and navigation. This something which was put forth by Shinzo Abe in 2007 was further taken forward in 2016 when Japan finally unveiled a FOIP strategy, or the short form for Free and Open Indo-Pacific. After that, in 2017, a key country in the entire global scheme of things, which is United States, it adopted it. So under the presidency of President Donald Trump, the United States decided to take this term, Free and Open Indo-Pacific, to its logical conclusion. And that's when it was adopted as a policy, as a foreign policy, key cornerstone of United States foreign and defense policy. So, this geopolitical change which is taking place is further accelerated by certain events. And these events, when I say most prominently, refers to the COVID pandemic as we have seen it last year. When the COVID pandemic started unfolding, China also started taking a very aggressive posture. And due to that, the key economies in the Indo-Pacific region, they started to looking to decouple from China. So, the key operative word here is decoupling from China. So on one hand, there's a lot of geopolitical convergence taking place, which is leading to decoupling from China. Now, if we go to the realist school of international relations, it talks about how trade creates relative gains. And once there are relative gains from the trade, your enemy can use the additional gains through trade to become militarily stronger. This is a proposition which has been put forth by many scholars like Longs and Leeds in 2006 and Gowa and Mansfield in 1993. So they say that states, when there is some sort of conflict taking place, even at a very low threshold of conflict, states prefer to trade within their own political and military alliance, or, a soft alliance. So when these countries are having a geopolitical sort of a convergence in terms of having a free and open Indo-Pacific, at that same time, they will also think about having a geo-economic convergence. So the first point that I want to mention here is that geopolitical convergence in Indo-Pacific will lead to geo-economic convergence as well. And when this geo-economic convergence takes place, what is going to be the future picture? Picture is going to look like this. India's Act East policy is now becoming Act Indo-Pacific. Now, people who have, the scholars who understood the Act East policy or who work on it, do recognize that the Act East policy is not limited to the Southeast Asian region, but India is now expanding its understanding towards the entire Indo-Pacific region. So the Act East policy is now becoming Act Indo-Pacific policy, where India is renewing its civilizational linkages via maritime trade routes in the Indo-Pacific region. And this is something, which is a part and parcel of India's foreign policy right now. In fact, if you refer to the work done by Dr. S. Shankar in the latest book that he's written, India's foreign minister has mentioned it at many forums that now India is looking to engage with Indo-Pacific, not only politically, but also economically. Japan has also said the same thing in its free and open Indo-Pacific policy, that India is going to play a huge role in keeping the Indo-Pacific region open and free. This is something which Australia also says. So, till now we can see how India, Japan, Australia, and South Korea, these four countries, which are four major economies in the Indo-Pacific region, are trying to are actually having a convergence in terms of their foreign and defense and economic policy when it comes to the Indo-Pacific region. So Australia, if you look at the white papers that are coming from Canberra, you can definitely see that there's a lot of, trust and a lot of emphasis on India as a first order of importance in Indo-Pacific. So, just talk to any big business person in Australia. They are interested in Indian market. They do want to do more trade with India, and while try to decoupling from China, they're trying to involve India as a major economic partner. And this is something that South Korea has also been doing. So, South Korea's new Southern policy specifically mentions that right now for South Korea, India and ASEAN region is going to be important. So, besides ASEAN, India is the only other region which is very important. Now, if we move forward and we see how this geo-economic alignment, which India is now going to pursue, is going to have ramifications for the entire region of South Asia. Now, how? See, most importantly, India is the largest economy in South Asia. And also it's the third largest in the world. So if you go not by the real GDP, but if you go by the purchasing power parity wise, India's GDP right now is $8.9 trillion. So that makes India the third largest economy in the world, GDP purchasing power parity wise. And India is the largest economy in South Asia. It has been consistent in growth. If you look at the growth rate, India's growth rate has nothing below 7% in the last 5 years or 6 years. India's manufacturing product base has diversified a lot. Even during the COVID pandemic, India has been successful in inviting foreign direct investment from the major players in the Indo-Pacific region. Also, India has its own indigenous production program going on, which is known as the Make in India program, as a part of which India is trying to become a 5 trillion economy by 2025. By 2030, many research have posited this, that India will be the world's third largest economy, not only in terms of GDP, PPP, which it already is, but also in terms of the real GDP. So, if you look at India's economic weight, it is the heaviest actor in South Asia. And that's a truth that, one cannot deny. Now, at the same time, South Asia has a lot of untapped intra-regional potential. So, on one hand, as geopolitical convergence will take place in Indo-Pacific, that will further lead to geo-economic convergence in Indo-Pacific, and that will again lead to, India becoming a part of the global value chains or the global economic, activities and transactions. It's going to have huge changes for South Asia as well. So what it will do is that it will create a lot of potential and opportunities for South Asia to trade with each other. So, if you currently look at South Asia, intra-regional trade is literally dismal. It's just 5% of their entire trade, according to the World Bank. Now, India will become a part of the global supply chains. India is also a part of the Supply Chains Resilience Initiative, due to which the global value chains, which are now trying to shift away from China, will be attracted by India. Now, this will lead to a new sort of a dynamic for regional value chains as well. And why so? South Asia has a very contiguous...
1 minute.
Okay, I'm just concluding, sir. So, if you look at South Asia, there's a lot of geographical proximity. Also, India is the largest market, and which is very attractive for the neighboring countries. So, if you look at South Asian countries, India is not doing all of this in isolation. When there is a Make in India program, there's also a Make in Pakistan and Make in Bangladesh program. So, all these countries are now trying to diversify their manufacturing product base. And if you look at the kind of trade which is taking place in contemporary world, without value chains, pulling something of that sort is nearly impossible. So, India's trade with the South Asian region is always between the range of 2 to 4%. But if all this business comes from Indo-Pacific to India, obviously India is going to share a part of that pie with its South Asian partners. And if you look at the economic borders in South Asia, they are the thickest in the world. Average tariff across the world is just 6.3%. But in South Asia, it is 13.6%, which is more than double. So, there's a lot of potential of lowering down the economic borders in South Asia by reducing the sensitive list under various trading agreements that exist. Also, we need to work on our ease of doing business rank. South Asia's ease of doing business rank is 117, and only sub-Saharan Africa performs better than South Asia. So, there's a lot of untapped potential. And once we start potentially, we start realizing this untapped potential, there's a huge opportunity when the global value chains will shift to India. India can sign up the smaller South Asian economies to become a partner in starting regional value chains. And all of this can be done only when the economic borders are brought down. I'm done speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Verma. This is very, very impressive. Thank you very much for your highly informative presentation. And I think the world is moving towards Indo-Pacific too, and in which I think India being one of the largest economies in the world has a greater role to play. And I think this is still untapped. And you have highlighted very critical points, including the role that India must play in the region, perhaps untapping the untapped resources in terms of economic tools that the region can offer. Obviously, the geopolitical and geo-economic convergence is perhaps one issue that we should be talking at a greater details in the public and policy discourses. And I must congratulate you for bringing that into the public spheres. And obviously, if you look at the Australian case that you have brought in, is perhaps very much valid, because given the Indian depth in terms of economy and the cultural diversity, and obviously economy doesn't only function in terms of number, but also the need, the cultural diversity that is needed to make India itself as a viable market. Look at the ecosystem to absorb the demand and supply. India itself. That's why we call it a subcontinent, isn't it? So I'm quite sure these are well taken. And if you look at even during the COVID situation, the need for intra-regional cooperation has never been felt this important. And you have made it quite clear when it comes to global value chain, inter-regional, and you have absolutely talked about the grim picture that when it is 5% intra-regional trade, I think the same report that you have referred to in terms of World Bank also talked about 25% in the case of ASEAN. And quite fascinating, I couldn't stop my smile when you speak about the ease of doing business. We are below sub-Saharans, and I'm quite sure this is a wake-up call, and I think this is where your presentation makes absolute value. And I'm quite sure you have also followed up that other countries are also trying to cope up, because at the end of the day, nobody is going to wait for us. Only that we are looking at each other. And this is, I have taken as a note that, and I think other participants will take a note, that Indian Act East policy would eventually convert itself into Act Indo-Pacific policy. But I often say that this is the time when we should do look at each other policy too. So I think this is very important. Thank you very much, Dr. Verma, for your outstanding presentation. And we should be talking about it much more. May I request Uddipta Ranjan Bourah to present your paper? Bourah? Thank you very much. Uddipta Ranjan Bourah, Dr. will be presenting a PowerPoint. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We just
yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so very good afternoon to all of you. Distinguished Chair Professor Khan, my mentor Dr. Tripathi, my friends and university seniors, Dr. Vaishali, Dr. Monica, and Ankur, and the other two distinguished speakers of this panel, and all the viewers who have joined us today for this discussion. So this talk that I'm going to present today is a part of a research project which was done under the aegis of the Indian Council of Social Science Research. It was a massive project in terms of the geographical area covered and also the historical time frame covered, but I will try to lay down some of the essential takeaways from the entire project in the next 8 to 10 minutes. I hope I can make some sense to the viewers and the listeners. So I will be talking about the India-China border, which in fact is an unsettled border, and as the and very as it is very common for most of the borders across the world, the borders of present day are inheritances from the imperial realms which existed prior to the establishment of the nation states. And this particular discussion today is an attempt to look at the initial communications and the initial attempts to define a particular fixed border between Ladakh or Tibet, between India or Tibet, or maybe between India and China. So what I'll do is that I'll begin with I'm so sorry, there's an issue with this presentation. Yeah. So what I'll do is that I'll begin with a brief understanding about the geographical area that I'm going to cover. So this is more or less the present day map of the northern part of South Asia. At one point of time, this entire region that I have shown with the help of this black line was a concern of a border between the India and China or Tibet. But but from the present day perspective, we are not concerned about the western part of this map, because much of this part has been taken over by Pakistan, and in fact some of the areas are illegally ceded to China already. For example, the Shaksgam Valley, as we see on the northernmost part. So what we will be concerned about is this eastern part, which I have separated with this line that I have drawn here. Many of the strategic points on the India-China border has been located and demarcated in this particular map, which I have borrowed from a particular source on internet. But some of the places which I feel are missing here, I'm trying to put them here for the reference of the viewers and listeners. So this particular region here is called the Spangur Gap or the Spangur So. This is very, very relevant in terms of India-China border, because this was one of the area through which the Chinese forces had penetrated into India in the winter of 1962. Then close to it is this place called Chushul. Chushul also is a very, very relevant point in terms of India-China border dispute. This today is also a border personnel meeting point between Indian and Chinese forces. Next is this place called Demchok. This is, I must put greater emphasis on it, that this is very, 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 very important in terms of India-China border dispute. And then this place is called Spiti. This lies in the present day Lahore and Spiti district of Himachal Pradesh. It also came up in the initial communications that were taking place concerning the defining of border. This is not very relevant for today's presentation, but still I am mentioning it because this in a way appeared in one or two of the exchanges or communication that took place regarding the defining of the boundary. So this is broadly the area which we are concerned about, as I had demarcated with the black line in the previous map. So what I'll do is that I'll briefly begin with a very short history of the region of the Ladakh area. That will help us to map out the imperial actors that were responsible in defining or determining a border or boundary between in the Tibetan in the Himalayan landscape. So Ladakh was mostly ruled by the Namgyal dynasty. I'm not going to far back in time. I'm just concerning around 17th and 17th century. So the area was mostly ruled by the Namgyal dynasty. And despite being a Buddhist kingdom, and despite being the neighboring Tibetan kingdom also a Buddhist kingdom, there were continuous conflicts between these two principalities. There were conflicts concerning the school of Buddhism that was followed, or maybe conflicts concerning the trade routes of Pashmina wool, or so on and so forth. What I mean to say is that despite being Buddhist kingdoms, these two were not necessarily in perpetual peace. There were conflicts. Around 1679 to 84, there were continuous Tibetan raids upon Ladakh. And as a result of it, the then ruler of Ladakh had to seek assistance from Kashmir, which was then under the rule of the Mughals of India. And the combined forces fought a war and defeated the Tibetans and pushed them back. And this particular treaty, called Treaty of Tingmosgang, was signed in 1684. This is a very, very relevant treaty, which we will see subsequently. These were some of the initial round of communications concerning the boundary that were made, and which in a way have continued till present time in all the negotiations between India and China. The India-China negotiations of 1960 also had mentioned to this particular treaty. And all the communications between India, China concerning a border definition had this particular treaty mentioned somewhere or the other. So this is a very relevant treaty. Then there was peace in the Himalayan borderlands for around 200 years till the rise of the Dogra rulers of Jammu. So under the suzerainty of the Sikh kingdom, they in a way captured Ladakh around the year 1834. But the ambitious general Joravar Singh was, he was not happy with the conquest of Ladakh. He wanted to get greater trade routes under his control, and he went on to, invade or attack the western part of Tibet. And there was a massive war with the Tibetans around 1841. So in 1842, this treaty called Treaty of Chushul, which is also known as Treaty of Leh in many places, was signed. And this also is a very relevant treaty in terms of the imperial exchanges, which I'm going to talk subsequently. Then finally, in 1846, this area came under the British European powers arrived in this particular Himalayan borderlands after the first Anglo-Sikh War. The area around this particular area, this particular region came under the control of the Britishers, and they had several arrangements with the Dogra ruler Gulab Singh, and subsequently it was made a princely state and so on and so forth. But this in a way is the brief history, very brief, very short and very quick. So this in a way is the very brief and very short introduction about what was happening in that area at that point of time, so as to help me locate the imperial actors of communications which were responsible for the initial round of negotiations concerning the India-China border or Indo-Tibet border. So these imperial actors that I have marked here are very, very relevant. They were the Kingdom of Ladakh for sure. They were there was the Sikh kingdom, there was the Dogra rulers of Jammu, there was the Tibetan kingdom, and of course there was Qing China and British India. These were the imperial actors who were responsible for the initial round of communications concerning a fixed and a determined border. And in a way, the modern nation states, China and India, have in a way dependent on these initial communications and these initial exchanges in trying to find a settled border. So some of the instruments of imperial communications, which two of them I have already talked, it was Treaty of Tingmosgang of 1684, Treaty of Chushul of 1842, Treaty of Lahore of 1846, Treaty of Amritsar 1846, and finally the British exchanges which occurred between 1846 and 48. So let us look at the first phase of the exchanges which were taking place. This was, I must tell you, prior to the advent of the Europeans, prior to the advent of the European ideas of territory, European ideas of borders, European ideas of linear boundaries. This was a time when all of these things were totally alien for this particular Himalayan borderland. It was only in the mid of the 19th century that the Europeans arrived in this particular geographical region and bring along all the complicated ideas of borders and boundary that they had derived, from the European context. So if we look at the initial round of negotiations, this was between Ladakh and the Kashmiri forces together combined, and they were fighting against the Tibet, and Treaty of Tingmosgang was signed. So the very relevant point here is that from the archival studies, we derive it that there was not much discussion about linear borders or boundaries in this particular agreement, in this particular treaty. They were mostly talking about their religious practices. They were mostly talking about political practices, religious practices, the movement of caravans, the movement of religious missions. Some smaller regions of territory were exchanged in a way or two, but the most explicit mention about boundary that was made in this particular treaty was, in the words of John Lal, it was tantalizingly cryptic. So the excerpt I'm trying to put here is that, with this exception, the boundary shall be fixed at the Lahari stream at Demchok. So this entire treaty, which was so relevant for establishing peace at that point of time, mentions just 5 words in terms of, a boundary or a border. It says that it is fixed at the Lahari stream at Demchok. Demchok I had shown you in the previous, in the initial map. And the Lahari stream today is popularly known as the Charding Nala, which falls, of course, in the Chinese part of the territory. So next treaty, which I had already mentioned, was this treaty of...
2 minutes, please.
Yeah, so I'll not go into the specificities of the treaties which are here. The broad argument which I'm trying to make here is that the initial round of communications which were made were very, very uncertain, very, very vague in terms of boundaries or in terms of fixed borders. With the advent of the Europeans, there was a completely new set of borders and new set of vocabulary that had arrived in that particular place. And as the British officials tried to negotiate with the Chinese counterparts, on contrary to whatever understanding about borders or boundaries that they were having at that point of time, as we already saw that it was sufficient for them to just mention about one small stream concerning the border of around 15,000 square miles. It was enough for them because they already knew how borders were defined, how boundaries were defined. They had their alternative ways of defining boundaries. Some international crossing points were established, and beyond that, there were the open frontiers for the nomads and for the cattle grazers. So, with the advent of the British colonizers in 1846, we see that the mode of communication, the way of communication, has further deteriorated into miscommunication, given the complete clash of civilization that these two parts were dealing with. The new set of vocabularies and new set of understandings concerning territory and border that the British part was trying to convince to the Chinese part, in a situation where communication was so delayed, there was no presence of internet connection, there was no presence of mobile phones, telephones. A letter had to, physically travel from, for thousands of kilometers and reach a particular officer who would then translate it into Chinese to have an understanding of it. He would read it and then he would retranslate it, or he would write in Chinese or send it to the English counterpart, which was sitting 2,000 or 3,000 kilometers away, who would again get it retranslated. And many of the things were miscommunicated in this particular rounds of interactions and communications. If you read the slide present here, you will see that it is full of European concepts. They have immediately started mentioning in 1846 about concepts such as perpetual sovereignty, such as territories, independent sovereignty. These were the words which were used by after the advent of the Britishers. And we saw that just 4 years back in 1842, the treaty that was signed, in that particular treaty, it was sufficient for them to just mention a small stream of few kilometers to define their border. But immediately after 4 years, with the advent of the Europeans and their vocabulary and their terms of understanding, the miscommunication, went on to deteriorate further. I have no time to go into further communications, I believe, but this was in a way the area. Okay, let me quickly reach the official communications that were made by the British side to the Chinese side immediately after conquering the territory towards the northern borderlands of India. So the Governor General Henry Hardinge writes out a letter to the Viceroy of Lhasa, about the need to establishing a fixed border. See, this is the excerpt of that particular border. If you read the first line, as it is now deemed expedient to settle definitely the exact limits of the territory that is held by the Chinese and the territory that is held by the Tibetans. So these are the words which are very, very new for the counterpart, and as a result, we see a lot of miscommunication. I do not have time to go into the official communications. If I go to the official communications, we will see how miscommunication kept on increasing, and how subsequently the Indian and Chinese side had overemphasized and over-dependent on these initial communications to find a settlement concerning the border, and as a result of which we have till date failed to obtain a specific solution or specific conclusion concerning the India-China border. Thank you. Yeah.
20 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
That would be enough. Yeah.
I'm sorry, it was a fascinating discussion because lost in translation is a major problem globally. And I think you have just brought out a very, very critical point, because the culture and the linguistic, how essentially the misinterpretation happens. I mean, the very idea of treaty is completely different in a way that probably European theater would understand, and the Mughals would understand, and perhaps the Arabs would understand. Even if you take the nomenclature or the word battle has different meaning. War has different meaning. Even in Bengali, when I come from Bangla, I speak Bangla, and the translation of war, battle, conflict often confuses us. I mean, the World War is known as Juddho or Vishwa Juddho, and Battle of Policy is also considered as Policy Juddho. So we really have these problems, and you have really brought that the issue of language, even in the case of Treaty of Chushul or Leh, 1842. And I think these are high time when the linguistics in interpreting the treaties has to be brought in, and how the dynasties, how the linguistic interpretation in different courts have been done. And obviously, this brings me to one of the classic issue of the official Success Acts. You can't question any of the treaties back in the colonial times. Also an important factor. So people couldn't really have access to those documents earlier, which are now increasingly becoming declassified, and people are now having access, now questioning. So maybe in future, this could be an important factor for people to do greater research. Can I request Ankur Sharma to present her paper? Ankur, are you here?
Yes, sir. Am I audible?
You're very much audible.
Greetings to everyone who's present. I'll just be sharing my PPT.
Ankur, may I remind you, you have 10 minutes?
Yeah, sure. I'll keep it under that. Is my PPT?
Yes, we can see that.
You see it. Now, my topic is fencing an open border, analyzing the Indo-Nepalese antagonistic actions over Kalapani border dispute through securitization theory. Now, this is a case study within my PhD and is a work in progress. I would appreciate suggestions and particularly constructive criticism with regards to my presentation. Now, Ole Weber and Barry Buisson have pioneered the securitization theory, and it is associated with the Copenhagen school. Now, I'm going to briefly explain what is securitization theory by actually paraphrasing the explanation given by Ole Weber himself. Now, according to him, there are no natural things out there that are security threats and others that aren't. It is us as communities in which we label certain things as security problems. So more specifically, this form of labeling happens in a process. A securitizing actor will say that this particular thing is an existential threat and we have to act upon it, and therefore it is legitimate to do something that we as a community wouldn't otherwise do. A relevant audience, upon hearing the statements of the securitizing actor about the threat, can or may say that they accept and agree with his statements. This relevant audience then grants the securitizing actor the right to use extraordinary measures. Now, securitization is a situation where a referent object depicts an existential effect and justifies to the relevant audience the use of extraordinary measure. Now, a referent object is something that is depicted as whose existence is being threatened, and therefore an extraordinary measure is required for it to survive. This referent object could be the existence of a nation, or it could be a form of freedom or social welfare. It is an aspect that people are willing to say that this has to survive and exist. Now, once the audience has agreed that this particular aspect has to survive, then the extraordinary measures can be justified to being used by the securitizing actor. Now, a simple example would be when Donald Trump made immigration into the United States as something that threatens aspects of the United States, and an extraordinary measure of building a wall is therefore required to safeguard America. Many people within the United States ended up agreeing with this rhetoric or this particular speech act of Donald Trump. Now, an important aspect in all of this is the audience itself. Now, according to Ole Weber, it is not necessary for the relevant audience to be the people themselves. The relevant audience can be very different depending on what kind of issue it is, what kind of political system a country has. In autocratic countries like North Korea, only a handful of people may be needed to be convinced. It is therefore a crucial event when the relevant audience is convinced, because it is at that point that a particular issue has changed into a securitized issue. That particular issue then attains urgency and it has to be solved, and measures to solve it have to be taken in priority. However, this also means that further discussion about the issue would be considered as a waste of precious time, and the extraordinary measures must be taken urgently. Ole Weber asserts that securitization theory can be used in different ways and in specific case studies, such as an escalation of a conflict. It can help in analyzing on how actors on one side started to depict an existential threat from the other side and justified extraordinary measures, or even why older security issues suddenly get into the security framing and how to also desecuritize it. Now I'll give a brief background to the Indo-Nepal boundary dispute. The boundary between India and Nepal is based on the Treaty of Sigoli that was ratified in 1816. Now it was a treaty that was signed between the British East India Company and the Kingdom of Nepal after the defeat of the Kingdom of Nepal in the Anglo-Gorkha War. There was also subsequent treaties and agreement that was signed between both of them to further delineate the boundary. Now in the western sector, that is Nepal's border with Uttarakhand, the treaty specified the Kali River as the boundary between the East India Company and Nepal. Post-independence, India and Nepal carried forward the treaty as the defining marker for the boundary. However, the treaty did not specify the origin of the Kali River, and this particular alignment has become an issue between both the countries. India claims that a small river that runs to the south of Kalapani as the origin and therefore the actual border, while Nepal claims the source of the Kali River lies at Limpudhara. Hence, the Kalapani and Lipu Lake in the east of the Kali River belong to Nepal. The territory currently has been and is also currently a sovereign part of India. Now, the Lipu Lake Pass is used for the pilgrimage by both Indian and Nepali pilgrims, both Hindu and Buddhist, towards the Kailash Parvat, Mansarovar, and other holy sites that are situated in Tibet, China. Now, what has happened recently is that the main catalyst for the escalation of the conflict was that India inaugurated in 2020 a new road through the Lipu Lake Pass that connects over the border with China. Nepal was already protesting the project. However, after the inauguration, Nepali government under KP Oli undertook an extraordinary measure. Nepal's parliament approved a constitutional amendment that provided for a new Nepal's map that included Lipu Lake, Kalapani, and Limpudhara as Nepali territory. Subsequently, it caused a major uproar in India, especially in media and social media. Now, in a brief and simple explanation of securitization of this escalation, KP Oli, as a securitizing actor, was able to convince the relevant audience, which in this case would be Nepal's political parties and members of the Nepal parliament, that the road by India at the Lipu Lake Pass is a threat to Nepali sovereignty, and an urgent extraordinary countermeasure is therefore urgently required to oppose it. The members of the Nepali parliament agreed to this rhetoric and as such agreed to undertake an extraordinary measure that is forming a new map that would include the disputed territories within Nepal's map. Now, securitization theory is capable of explaining a particular question that is asked about this dispute: why Nepal undertook such a measure now and not before, and why the Kalapani dispute escalated to the extent that it did in 2020. Now, my PhD chapter and hopefully a subsequent research article would contain a more detailed explanation of the nuances of the current escalation of the Kalapani dispute, analyzed through securitization theory. I also wanted to touch upon the securitization of the Kumaoni ethnic nationalism that has resulted from what they consider as cartographic aggression by Nepal on Kumaoni territory within India. Now, Kumaon is a part of Uttarakhand, and there are particularly two regions, Garhwal and Kumaon. Kumaon is the one that borders Nepal. This combined with already existing hostile memories among the people of Garhwal and Kumaon of the historical memory of the dark phase, which they consider as a dark phase of the Gorkha rule in their land, and what they consider as partition of Kumaon's territory by the Treaty of Sigoli. However, due to this lack of time, this could be a topic of discussion at another time. Now in the end, I would actually like to thank NICE for allowing me to present this paper, and I look forward to suggestions and comments from the participants.
Thank you very much, Ankur. That was very crisp, and you have really brought into the securitization theory. And yes, the actors are fundamental in the securitization theory, and I'm quite sure your theoretical composition and the theoretical framework is very relevant in understanding the India-Nepal border construction. I will leave that for the audience to ask you question and put constructive suggestions for the research you're conducting. So may I now move to Commandant Colonel Dr. Bhaskar Gupta, and I think already Commandant has put a question for everyone too on IHATR operations. Commandant, up to you. You have 10 minutes, or perhaps Ankur has done a little favor to all of us. You may take 1 or 2 minutes more.
Okay, can you hear me? Everybody, can you hear me?
Please do.
Chair, can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, very much.
Okay. Good afternoon, all of you, and thank you for this opportunity to interact with all of you on this crucial issue of cross-border disaster management, especially in South Asia, and how India can do a role. And the question I will still continue to put, when we come to that, we'll see how many of you are really aware of this term, which is prevalent nowadays. Okay. So without any more this thing, I will share my screen and start the presentation. I will take about 8-9 minutes as allowed by the chair. Topic is disaster management in South Asia and its cross-border challenges. Okay, we will now cover why Asia and particularly South Asia is prone to cross-border disasters. Then we come to India and its role in cross-border disaster management in South Asia, especially in the post-NDMA era, that is 2005 onwards. What is the role of armed forces, specifically the Indian armed forces, that is the 3 major services, Army, Navy, and Air Force, plus the Coast Guard, in cross-border disaster management, which is also called IHDR operations. What is the way forward and the support organization which we can create or is already there and we can modify under the aegis of the ASEAN or the SAARC? And lastly, we'll conclude. Okay, now this is what we were talking of. Why Asia? 4 world's most active fault lines in the Himalayas, crisscross the countries running through thousands of kilometers. So we have high incidence of cross-border earthquakes, transboundary floods, tropical cyclones, erratic monsoons, and volcanic eruptions, even drought sometimes. Now the major riparian regions also originate from the Tibetan Plateau. You are aware the 5 major rivers that originate from the Tibetan Plateau. So they have also experienced risks of modern disasters, as in terms of break in livelihoods, increasing natural habitats, getting, I would say, submerged with these cities, rural habitats getting submerged amongst the urban ones, the food crisis, and the water problems. Rapid urbanization has also happened in South Asia in the last 2 decades with industrialization. This has led to the urban transition, which is the rural to urban migration, which has generated additional vulnerabilities, especially in the coastal lands, the floodplains, creating hillsides and conditions which are not suitable for living by humans. So we have become trapped in an interdependent matrix that to an increase in vulnerabilities to the combined effect of disaster. If you can see the slide, in the last 35 years, you can see the number of disasters in Asia Pacific versus the rest of the world. It's just double. Okay. Next slide. Now it's better. This is what I was talking of. Anybody can tell the term? Let's see if somebody has given in the chat. Oh, okay, I got it from somebody. International Humanitarian and Disaster Relief. Okay, so that's correct. So this is what is now happening. It is either India or international humanitarian and disaster relief operations, which are being done by the Indian Armed Forces across this spectrum. And will be continue doing it. Why? Simply because the strategic air and sea lift capabilities are available only with the armed forces, the carriers, the C-17 Globemasters, the naval, destroyers, the tankers. All this is available only with the armed forces. And recently, you've seen how we've evacuated people from Yemen, Maldives, even Afghanistan. Also, they have this integrated intelligence and surveillance capability. Okay. Logistics is very good. They have mobility, they have organization and cohesive force. This role also helps the country in articulating its military diplomacy. Sorry, there's something wrong in the slide. Sir, I'll have to stop share and go again. It's got stuck somewhere.
Come on and go ahead.
Just give me a second. I think there's something got stuck in this slide. Yes, I think we should be okay now. Yeah. So the employment of armed forces is governed by the MCDA guidelines. It is basically under the Oslo guidelines for use of military and civil defense in disaster response. We can also employ the armed forces in search and rescue operations. And across the spectrum, basically they need to integrate and mount their operations. As I mentioned, recent examples are Mali, Yemen rescue, ONGC oil rig rescue, you're aware of, Nepal earthquake operations, and if you can see the slide of the Indian Armed Forces from the headquarters, integrated defense staff, these are the various operations carried out in the last 15 years. Kyrgyzstan, Sri Lanka floods, Malaysian airliner, US, even US, we were requisite for the Katrina cyclone. Lebanon we went, Philippines we have gone, Myanmar cyclone we went, and the Pakistan floods. So what is this cross-border role? Basically, full armed forces of India will be allowed in the neighbors. So let us just see this country-wise amongst the neighbors. That's what we're talking of, cross-borders. Pakistan, you're all aware, our relations are hostile since 47. We fought 4 wars. There's increasing suspicion amongst the role of India, and they don't want India to be participative in their cross-border disasters, especially after liberation of Bangladesh. So this relation will not go, and Pakistan will not allow Indian armed forces into their territory for disaster relief. Also, Pakistan more or less has set up their own NDMA on the model of our Indian NDMA for disaster management. China, there are no instances of cooperation in disaster management between India and China, though both have felt the need. And this is because basically of the LAC, the disputed LAC between the two countries, and there is limited cross-border aid, there is no exchange, and even if it is there, it is minus the armed forces. Recently, you are aware of the Galwan Valley crisis that happened. Before that, the Doklam. So it is unlikely that Indian armed forces will be called upon to operate for disaster relief in the near future, even if an eventuality arises. Bangladesh, yes, very much. India has helped it in various flood relief operations. Armed forces have taken a lead role. However, there is one instance in 1985 where US's armed forces landed for disaster relief and India was asked to pull out. That is basically the Cold War era. In Sri Lanka, the most glaring example is of the post-tsunami operation where Indian relief landed the same day. They continued thereafter till the situation normalized. And we earned the goodwill of Sri Lanka across the board. Hence, it is predicted that we will be called upon for disaster relief in Sri Lanka in the near future. As regards the other South Asian neighbors, Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar, Maldives, Mauritius, and Afghanistan. Among the small neighbors, Nepal, Bhutan, and Maldives literally exist for India's assistance in different fields. So they will call upon us and we will go there. In fact, both, again, as I said, of Pakistan, Nepal, and Bhutan have structured their NDMAs on the Indian model, and they will continue to seek assistance, including allowing Indian armed forces to operate from their soil if the need arises. Myanmar, the problem is the military regime there, and they're being close to China. So it's unlikely that they will allow our armed forces there unless we can convince them to do them otherwise, where the China factor plays. Mauritius has relied upon India for any relief and will do so in future. Afghanistan, this is a question mark now, tormented by an unfinished war and now the Taliban takeover. So it's unlikely that Indian government will use armed forces there in an active role till it becomes relatively peaceful, and that is doubtful. Even if it does, the contingent may be very small and for a limited or short period. Now the question, why Indian armed forces are preferred across Asia? It is a fact that they're well equipped and trained to undertake this task in any part of the world when called upon. And over the last 72 years, we have seen that Indian armed forces have been deployed upon in 28 countries as UN peacekeeping or peace monitoring contingents. And within these operations, they have won praise from the international community, especially for their role in disaster management in Asia whenever called for. Indian troops are liked the world over. Why? They're disciplined, gentlemanly conduct, they're well versed in human rights, they have correctly handled the situation, especially in a foreign country, they have adequate experience, they're well trained in United Nations operations, both peacekeeping and SAR and IHDR. SAR is Search and Relief Evacuation Office. Most important is that they demonstrate command and control, which is of exemplary nature. And if you can see, they have the history of helping the victims, even at the cost of their own life. And two very examples I can give you is the Uttarakhand floods and the Srinagar flood, where armed forces personnel gave up their lives to rescue people. Now, talk of the way forward. What is the way forward? Basically, we have to understand that we have to support each other in South Asia towards cross-border disaster management. If we see the history of SARC, though SARC was set up in 1985, it has taken it 22 years to set up its regional disaster center. So it came up in 2007 as the SDMC, or the SARC Center for Disaster Management and Preparedness, which was initially in New Delhi. It's now shifted to Ahmedabad. Also, we set up the SARC Coastal Zone Management Center, that is the SCZMC in Malé, and the SARC Meteorological Research Center, that is the SMRC in Dhaka. However, the problem is that it's ineffective due to the continuing Indo-Pak tensions. We hope and expect that with time, these weak links will get sorted out through discussions, and SDMC will then effectively function as the disaster management center of SARC. If you can see this cartoon where we've depicted Imran Khan, who says one more virus won't matter. Now, what is the other organizations in terms of regional dimensions? We have the ASEAN. After the Bhuj quake and the tsunami of 2004, governments of South Asia have realized that disasters will not follow national boundaries. We have seen these examples, the Bhuj quake, the Pak quake of 2005, the floods in Bihar and Assam, which also happened in Bangladesh and Bhutan, originating in the mountains of Nepal and Tibet. The coastal regions of Bangladesh and India are hit. Cyclones of Bengal alike. Even in the Arabian Sea, we see the Gujarat and Sindh coast of Pakistan alike getting hit by cyclones. So we have to think of another organization, that is the ASEAN, which had an ad hoc setup earlier. Now, okay, previously it was practiced among ASEAN members as with the help of international NGOs like USAID, Oxfam, and others. They actually began the work on mutual work under the broad agenda of ADMARE, that is the Asian Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response, which was signed in 2005, implemented in 2009, and then they set up the Asia Disaster Preparedness Center, which you can see on the slide today, has about 90 staff, they have 17 nationalities, and works under the UNDP, and is quite effective in disaster preparedness of Asia, especially South Asia. Now, there's a report I went to, the Asia Pacific Disaster Report, which clearly says that disasters are linked to inequality and poverty. So what Asian Union needs to do is to maximize the investments in having a comprehensive portfolio of policies that address poverty, inequality, and disaster risk. Automatically, we will be able to tackle the disasters. We can use the emerging technologies, big data, digital identities, to ensure that this vulnerable and the poor are included in these policy interventions which these countries think of. We also need to work closely to unlock the potential of regional cooperation. Today, there are egos and there are other things which do not let them come together. And as you can see on this slide, there is so much that they can do. Early warning, capacity building, climate change, resilient livelihood, and so on and so forth. These entire South Asian countries, if they get together, a lot can be achieved across Asia Pacific. But to conclude, we know that South Asia will continue to face a spectrum of national threats. There is no way that we can avoid them. So the approach is to form public-private partnerships, which involve not only the civil society and government, but also the private sector. Now, this is an important recommendation. Cooperate where opted. These collaborative actions will create synergy and create a bigger impact in contributing towards growth and achievement of the development agenda, wherein disaster management will get tackled. We know that they are of cross-border nature. So we need two countries which are affected by the disasters. If they combine, these can be handled better. So what we need is a coordinated regional DM capability, which reduces redundancy and gaps in the resource challenge area. That is the need of the hour. And since India dominates the South Asian region and is affected by the changing relations with neighbors, I feel we should need to take a lead. As we can see in the slide, the Asia-Pacific Alliance for Disaster Management, it has its 6 tenets. It will be beyond borders. It will be mutually assisting each other. It will look at humanity as the main agenda. It will be transparent, good governance, and willingness of people, and be a practical thing. That's all I end here, Professor Chair. Thank you. Any questions I'll take on later.
Thank you very much, Colonel Gupta. That was absolutely comprehensive, and you have brought out very, very important points, including the role of armed forces. I mean, obviously, you have cited the role of the armed forces, and I think this is pretty much the case of all these South Asian armed forces at the moment. At the end of the day, none of these countries are immune to the climate change, and climate change is not going to wait for anybody, any of the countries. And when bird flu happened, it didn't wait for the border control to stop it. And even the COVID is a harsh reminder that you cannot do it without collaboration and cooperation. And Prime Minister Modi, Prime Minister Imran Khan, and our Honorable Prime Minister, now of course came together and started to talk that we cannot just let everything go the way it should go, or it has been going. So, and you have brought out the harsh reality or a reminder of the political divides too, which is also a harsh reminder. And obviously, their mistrust is there, but at the end of the day, hope is also there. And you have brought a very critical aspect, which I think is important for all the armed forces as well as the public to remember, that when it comes to strategic airlifting in the case of disaster, I mean, you cannot do it just like in a second of time. I mean, you also have to be very serious who has the capacity, doesn't it? In that case, obviously, your expertise and the example of Indian armed forces is a lesson for others too. So we have to barter our capacity. Some countries have expertise in something, some countries doesn't have expertise. So we have to really think about cooperation rather than mistrust. And COVID is once again a reminder that your weakness should not be my strength, and rather your weakness should be a reminder that I have to help you and you have to help me too. Yes, Taliban case is an important factor, but that should not hold us behind, but we should find a solution for that. Indian role in the UN peacekeeping operation, Bangladesh's role in US peacekeeping operation, this very platform hosted by Nepal, their role in the UN peacekeeping operation makes us unique. And therefore, we have multiple things to offer to the world in terms of disaster management. If we can't do it, who can do it better than us? You have brought the SAARC. We should also think about BIMSTEC, and BIMSTEC has a dedicated and you would be happy to know that both the countries, Bangladesh and India, has set up coastal cooperation in terms of...
Yes. I should have mentioned that.
Tsunami is a great reminder for the ASEANs, so is for us. So Myanmar, even if they don't want to cooperate, at some point of time, they will have to, because of population is not only aligned in the bay, but also inside the bay. So, Commander, I must thank you for bringing the PPPP, public-private partnership, which is not only confined within the civil society and NGOs, because consumption, demand, and supply is also dominated by the private sector, who are the corporates. So they have their responsibilities to perform. So hence, climate change is contributed by them too. So, Commander, thank you for bringing that part of the story to the public, and I congratulate you for this outstanding presentation. And I think the role of the forces in disaster management is very, very critical. And may I now move to Nancy for your presentation on transboundary water conflict?
Am I audible?
You're very much audible, Ms. Puri.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. You are.
Okay, so just give me a second. I'm just sharing the slides. Okay, my slides are visible.
No,
Am I audible?
we can't see your slides. Let me ask.
Am I audible?
You are audible, but we cannot see your slides.
Hello.
Can you hear us, Ms. Puri?
Am I audible?
You are
yes,
audible.
yes. Yes, you're audible.
Can't
Are we audible to you?
Am I
Yes, you are
audible?
audible.
Ms. Puri, you are audible to us.
Yes.
Yes, you are audible, Nancy.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Now, okay, thank you so much, sir. Actually, some technical glitches was there. So I hope now the slides are visible.
No, your slides are not visible to us. Paki, can you check?
Okay.
No, sir, it's not visible to me as well. So, ma'am, your slides are not visible. If you wish to display slides.
Yes. Now it is visible. Is it visible now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. So, firstly, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I would like to thank Nice Nepal for giving me this great opportunity to present this paper. So, the title of my paper is Transboundary Water Conflict Between India and Bangladesh, an Analytical Study. My name is Nancy Puri. I'm a research scholar from Amity Institute of International Studies, Amity University, Noida, Uttar Pradesh, India. So I'm starting with the first slide. The first slides, which is discussing about the introduction one. So Bangladesh and India are South Asian countries. Bangladesh shared 4094 kilometers of land borders with India on 3 sides, and the 4th side is open with the Bay of Bengal. There are various issues between Bangladesh and India that needs to be resolved. Sharing water of 54 transboundary rivers that flows from India to Bangladesh is one of the major issues to resolve. Bangladesh is mostly dependent on India for their water and has no control over the watershed management policy of the rivers. Being a smaller, military, and economic than India, Bangladesh cannot influence the watershed management policies and face floods and water scarcity, reducing yield production and fish productivity, and ecological imbalance in the areas. The saline water intrusion in the southwestern part of Bangladesh and reduced navigation. Being a smaller country, Bangladesh has less opportunity to bargain over the water issues with India. As a powerful actor, India tends to gain hegemony over the actors, especially on the lower riparian country, Bangladesh, that is also found in the river Sheldon case. In both countries, the conflict resolution mechanism is mainly state dependent and other relevant stakeholder that remains neglected. Access to water, lack of transparency and accountability and water rights was always overlooked by India, and the condition remains so. So according to Rogers and Hall, they both have written the paper in 2003. So in that paper, what they viewed that water governance is the combination of the political, social, economic, and administrative system, which manage the water resources and provide services in the different level of the society. Whereas on the other hand, if I say here that Monich have written an article in 2003, what he is, his own viewpoint. He thought that the water governance is the decision-making process which shows the power to the decision maker that how a decision will be made, who will make the decision under the particular circumstances. Now I'm moving on to the next slide. The next slide, which is discussing about the methodology. Secondary data sources are used for this paper to analyze the trans-boundary water conflicts between Bangladesh and India. Moreover, different papers, journals, websites using during the whole work process and content of this paper is based on the summarized view of those sources. Discussions and conclusion is completely the writer's personal understanding based on qualitative analysis of the existing literature and the analysis available on the issues. So now I'm moving on to the next slide which is discussing about the water politics in the transboundary water sharing. So the transboundary water issues is a severe socio-political issues in Indo-Bangla region. There are always a considerable uncertainty and less information about the impact of water management and dam building in the Tepaimukh area. However, it becomes a political challenge both in Bangladesh and in Northeast India. In India, it is showed a state-society conflict. In Bangladesh, civil society comes forward against the Tepaimukh Dam construction. For example, they set up a committee named as a Tepaimukh Dam Resistance Committee. In Bangladesh, Sylhet area will be profoundly affected if the dam is built so. Local people organize a committee to protest the dam, namely Union Sangram Committee. Not only that, the political parties also made a coalition of all parties, including the Communist Party of Bangladesh, that is CPB. In the national state, Bangladesh Nationalist Party, that is BNP, the then opposition party of Bangladesh, highly criticized the decisions of India's dam building efforts. It has always been revealed that when Awami League into the power of Bangladesh, they still follow the conciliatory policy with India. It has also proved during the Ganges Treaty in 1996. Therefore, Awami League government answered the critics of the opposition party that no dam will construct until Awami League is in government, which also expressed the closeness of Awami League with India. However, it has proved that the both government of two countries lost their credibility. Tista River negotiation hanged on because of the Indian internal politics and struggle of the state's central power. They showed up their face and entered into the negotiation process. Though the agreement was negotiated by the government of India and Bangladesh, pulling out immediately prior to the signing in 2011, the bilateral meeting of the two governments, just because of the chief minister of the Indian state of West Bengal. So now I'm discussing here about the next paragraph, which is about the from conflict to cooperation. Yes, both the countries that India and Bangladesh had also, moved on to the how this cooperation can be raised, how this issue can be solved. So in 2011, when the Prime Minister Manmohan Singh visited Dhaka, highlighted the improvement of bilateral cooperation on the management of shared river. The diplomats and the leaders in both countries feel the same, though the leaders in both countries feel the same. Though it is still stated dependent, two nations agreed to promote trans-boundary water management, hydropower development, including the ecosystem protection. In this case, India tried to show cleaner image by inviting delegates from parliaments, opposition leaders of Bangladesh, and the journalists to the Tepaimukh Dam. India also agreed to share the environmental assessment report and formulated the terms of references in 2012. India also offered Bangladesh joint venture hydroelectric project in northeast India to increase the power production in both countries by sharing both costs and benefits. Awareness is rising in both countries to have an integrated water resource management approaches in focus with the necessity of multi-purpose and basin-wise cooperation mechanism with different national and international stakeholders. Experts of the participating countries in India's Northeast hydropower grid will foster the cooperation among them. Moreover, an international organization such as Global Water Partnership introduces the Integrated Water Resources Management, that is IWRM, in Bangladesh and India to set up the 3 E's, the 3E, which means the efficiency of the water resources, equity and allocation in different social and economic group, and environmental sustainability. So this is all for my paper. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Puri, for your concise, crisp, and a brief presentation, and you have highlighted the very salient points between the relationship between Bangladesh and India in terms of water relations, particularly when it comes to political regimes. And you have really highlighted the particularly regime-to-regime specific relationship, as well as the state-to-state relationship. And obviously, you have also mentioned the very sensitive aspects. Is obviously a very dominant issue, which is highly political when it comes to India, but it is highly economic in terms of Bangladesh's position. Hence, Bangladesh is now looking forward to technological solution to the Tista water resource management, which is probably which probably is going to be outsourced at some point of time. And also looking into the, as you have mentioned, that integrated water resource management will also be greatly assisted by technological solutions, and we will have to really focus on the economic sensitivity over here without relying much on the political debates. And this is where probably the government at some point of time come up with policy responses. With all these discussions in hand, we don't have much time in our hand. We have exactly, technically, 7 minutes in my hand, and we had a broad spectrum of discussion. I may open the floor for question and answer. If anybody has any question for the panel speakers, you can raise your hand or you can post your questions. Anyone? I don't see anyone raising hands. Okay, since I don't have anyone to, any of the panelists wants to add anything to their discussion, or anyone wants to complement to or have any inputs to any other panelists? I think, Commandant, you wanted to add something?
Thank you, sir. What I wanted to add was what you already said. I just missed this BIMSTEC part. BIMSTEC is the new international sharing, especially with Bangladesh and the Southeast Asian nations, where we are doing a lot of collaborative actions in terms of sharing, disaster management, sharing protocols, visits by each other in terms of even earthquake-resistant buildings, coastal protection, including the joint patrolling between the two navies and the Coast Guard. So what I want to say is that, yes, South Asia, okay, basically Asia will be between India neighbors are with us, and it become a better regional understanding, especially if we can win over Pakistan and get over their objections and restart SARC 2.0 or SARC 2.5 maybe, because SARC is more or less a dead entity today. Free trade agreement is not there, the NAFTA is not working. There's nothing happening in SARC, even though the secretariat is there. So SARC can be an answer to ASEAN. ASEAN, we are already there. BIMSTEC, we are already there. Shanghai Cooperation, we are already there. So this intra-country rivalry for dominance of Asia, and whosoever today dominates Asia will be the pivot of the world. This there is no doubt about. Right. Because of the trade here, because of the population here, because of the resources here, the oil and the gas deposits, the lithium deposits and all. So China is trying to hedge us down by trying to confine you within that famous term which was used, string of pearls. And that is where I would feel Afghanistan is more important. Right. Whichever way Afghanistan goes, a string of pearls gets completed. So what we need and what our neighbors need is to get together and try and not let China dominate and let this regional grouping of SAARC or ASEAN or BIMSTEC come up as an alternative to China. One thing that's come up and which has scared China is Quad. People know that. So maybe China will wake up and stop its march to rule the world. That's all I want to add. Thank you.
Thank you. With that note, this is my responsibility to conclude this session by thanking everyone. We have discussed a wide range of issues, academic, from the academic perspective, from the theoretical perspective, from a very diverse thoughts, discourses. I was particularly, from my very personal point of view, I was quite intrigued by Dr. Raghuvanshi's cinematic approach, which has largely been missing. I personally am a great fan of, I'm a Bengali. I'm quite sure you're very aware of Satyajit Ray and Uttam Kumar, but equally I'm a great fan of Anna, which is Rajnikant. I mean, a lot of people will be quite intrigued to see that a Bengali is a great fan of Rajnikant, but which I am, in fact. But that also tells you that how cinematography can actually influence your thought process. And obviously, Tripathi has brought out the Western discourse to Eastern discourse, which is needed. And I'm quite sure Monica was talking about regional cooperation and the role of the greater powers and the emerging powers. We should not forget that. Bourah has talked about the miscommunication. Ankur has talked about the securitization theory. How much can we securitize everything? I mean, that corresponds Colonel Gupta's idea that COVID is not going to wait for you. I mean, with the guns, you can't solve every problem. And then obviously, Puri has talked about the other issues linking the water. I mean, if you don't deliver water, the technology is coming. Are we going to wait for whether somebody is going to give water or take water, or what are we going to do about it? So all these issues simultaneously exist. Problems exist, solutions exist. The best thing about this discussion is that at least our takeaway at NICE is that we have more solutions than problems, actually. If you look at the amount of problems that you have discussed, actually you have discussed more solutions. So when you have more solutions, then you have more optimism. And that's the point that we have to discuss. Even today, we have talked about corporates, the role of the corporates too. So I think with that happy note, I must thank NICE for organizing this event, which deserves appreciation from all of us who were present here, and the brilliant minds will. This is a great network, and all of you should meet quite often and discuss. And this discussion should not stop here. We have academics, we have the promising academics, future corporate leaders, we have the military officer, we have the practitioners, and these discussions should continue. And then only the success of this discussion will be there. With that note, thank you very much for your patient hearing. Thank you very much for being here, and hope to see you in future engagement as the time progresses. And stay safe, stay well, and keep everybody safe too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Baki, shall I?
Thank you, Professor.
Baki, shall I?
Distinguished Chair, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, as we have come to the end of this session, we would like to express a sincere gratitude and thanks to the Chair for agreeing to chair and moderate the session today. Our sincere thanks also goes to all the speakers for being a part of the event and delivering such comprehensive and convincing presentations. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from the diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations. Finally, we must also mention our deep sense of appreciation for the audience who participated in the webinar and those who are watching us live. Thank you for your valuable time and attention, and for making this session productive with your questions. Once again, we are truly honored to have you all with us today. Please do join us in the next session. Thank you so much.